Good afternoon, everybody. This is Adrienne Montgomery. I'm with ERP VAR. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we're going to be talking about Dynamics GP and automating the process manufacturing and shipping within Dynamics GP. And I'm so pleased to be joined today by BatchMaster and StarShip. And we're talking about the integration with Dynamics GP for process manufacturing. Just a little bit about the companies here. We've got Antione Thibault, Director of Pre-Sales with BatchMaster with us, and Chris Sletner, Sales Executive over at StarShip. And BatchMaster has been providing process manufacturing software integrations for over 25 years. And they allow you to bring your products to market faster while reducing and complying with customer industry-specific and federal regulatory requirements. BatchMaster integrations include, in addition to Dynamics GP, Sage 100, Sage 300, SAP Business One, and QuickBooks. And StarShip has been doing shipping integration since 1989. They are a UPS Ready partner, a Platinum FedEx compatible solution provider, and they provide automation for small parcel, regional, and LTL shipments. And they have market share leading mid-market ERP shipping integrations with Sage, Sage 100, Sage 300, Sage 500, X3, now Sage Enterprise Management, Microsoft Dynamics, Acumatica, QuickBooks. So these are both very established and proven integrations with Dynamics GP. And we're going to be talking about how an order comes into Dynamics GP, and BatchMaster picks up all the details of that order to automate the manufacturing process and passes the details of that order over to StarShip, where StarShip will facilitate the automation of shipping and pick the most ideal carrier based on customer location, price, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Antione to get us started here with BatchMaster.
Thank you very much, Adrienne. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to BatchMaster Manufacturing for Microsoft Dynamics GP. And as Adrienne said, we've been servicing the food and beverage, nutraceutical, chemical, and life sciences industries for close to 30 years now. And in process manufacturing, we understand the differences between discrete and process. And you can see here that we provide a lot of functionality that's unique to the process industry, such as expiration dates on lot numbers, nutritional values for food and nutraceutical manufacturers, formula equations. We'll see that, how that impacts food, chemical, life sciences, volatile materials, GHS and STS for chemical, strength and potencies of lot numbers, label claims for nutra and food, losses and gains in production, signature capture, if you need to go paperless, and along with that, FDA and BRC SQF certifications. So within our process manufacturing customers, they all have these two key cycles that we cater to. The first, the manufacturing cycle, and we're going to walk through both of these in this presentation. So we have customer needs that come in that can lead to new product development, could be internal product development or an external request that leads to planning, scheduling, production, analysis, whether that's cost analysis, looking at estimated cost or actuals, and then also analysis of throughput, yield, efficiency. And then in the inventory cycle, we have receiving raw materials to storage of those raw materials, production, storage of the finished goods, and then shipping the finished goods out the door. And then throughout that entire life cycle, we have quality and traceability, as we'll see. Now in Dynamics GP, you can see the BatchMaster is embedded within the platform. It's not an external integration. So you have one user login, one interface, one database, and then we add all of our key intellectual property that you see here under manufacturing functions. And we're going to walk through all of these in the presentation. And then we enhance certain GP transactions or functions in the system for inventory, purchasing, and then sales orders. And it's at the sales order level that we have our proven seamless integration with StarShip. So we begin by talking about a formula. So for some of you, that may be called a recipe, but broadly, we treat it as a formula. And we'll look at examples of formulas, but you can see I have an intermediate formula that may go into a finished good. You can have multiple levels of intermediates. And those formulas are going to be separate, but related to your container and or packaging bill of materials. So generally, we're going to be mixing our formulas and then filling them into a container, and then possibly having a case pack or a pallet on top of that as well. And we'll look at all the characteristics of each of these as we go. So beginning with the product development lifecycle that we just talked about, within the database, we'll have things like nutritional data. So for your food and nutraceutical manufacturers especially, you may need to formulate to a certain sodium level, or within your nutritional supplements, you need to show how much vitamin C is in a supplement, et cetera. For those industries, those physical properties are automatically installed as part of the initial configuration. So now all you have to do is define at the raw material level how much of each nutritional property you have at that raw material, and we'll roll it up in the formula for you automatically, and you'll see an example of that in a minute. Within the formula, of course, you can change your quantities based on lot strength, potencies, your physical property equations. You have loss, of course, that's going to be factored in throughout. And then we have revision control by managing the different versions of the formula. And we'll see an example of approvals and revisions as well. And then within the formula, we can have alerts when target properties are not met. And those are visual alerts that are on screen while you're formulating, or also alerts that can be sent to a manager after the formula is completed. And we can dynamically balance our ingredients. So you have maybe APIs for pharmaceuticals that you then need to adjust the filler based on the potency of that API. And then we can do comparisons, side-by-side comparisons of physical properties, costs, et cetera, and you'll see examples of those. And then, of course, we have our multi-level workflows for approvals, where you can have a chain of approvals that you go through to finalize a product. So here we have an example of what we call a bomb explosion. So starting from the top level, we have a finished good that is composed of multiple intermediates that each have different raw materials within those. So this gives you an idea of how we can tie formulas, multi-level formulas together into a finished good bill of material. And then notice that we have different locations for each. So if you have different manufacturing facilities or co-packers, whatever the case may be, you can segregate those out by physical location. From the bomb explosion, we can also take a look at where these items are being used in which different formulas or bill of materials, and also if they're intermediates, which formulas they're made from. And then notice we also have different costing methods, different types that we support. So here we have a standard cost, a moving average cost as well. And we'll see that repeated throughout as we talk about costing in every phase of formulation, bill of material, production. So now we get into the formula details a little bit, and you can see we're looking at the line items of a formula. Here's the revision 4. You'll have different statuses of your revisions that you can work through. It could be development, experimental, pending approval. Approved is now active, and that active revision is the one that can be made in production. So you don't have to worry about somebody making an unapproved revision. You have obsolete revisions, et cetera, and you can always switch back and forth between different revisions in production as needed once it's approved. In the line items, you see a lot of materials in this particular example. Some are raw materials, some are intermediates in this case. You can also have work instructions or your SOPs embedded within the formula. You'll see an example of that later on when we get into production. Of course, we have our quantities required in whatever unit of measure you want. We always have a system weight and volume. So if you work in pounds and gallons, great. Kilograms, liters, great. We don't care. You'll set that up at the beginning, and then you can have any unit of measure in the formula, and we'll convert between weight and volume automatically based on the density that you define of those raw materials. That allows you to formulate by weight and schedule production by volume, but still weigh the raw materials individually if you want to. Here you see our nutritional properties for food. So like I said, these are provided out of the box. You'll define the physical properties for each of the raw materials, and then we roll this up into the formula. Here you see an example for sodium that's out of our target range. So it's either too high or too low. So now we can select which raw materials we want to recalculate, enter a new sodium target value, and it'll recalculate those raw material quantities on the fly. Here, notice we talk about costs quite a bit. So we have different costing methods that you can choose from for an experimental perspective. when you get into production, whatever the raw material cost is and whatever the raw material costing method is, that's what's going to get rolled up into the cost of the production batch. But when you're in product development, you have a lot of theoretical costing options, as you'll see, that you can toggle between to come up with a sales price, for example. And here we have a breakout of some additional costs. So on the cost tab, we have fixed and setup costs, and these are not going to vary with the size of the batch. So every time we go to make a batch of this particular formula, we're going to have 5 hours of this labor and 4 hours of this labor at whatever the labor rate that we have set up is. But then you can also have variable labor. So that would scale up with the batch size. So if your standard of your formula is say 100 pounds and you want to make a batch of 1,000 pounds, then you would need 10 times more labor to produce that batch size in a variable scenario. And you can have an unlimited number of labor and overhead costs associated with each formula and each bill of material. And then here you see an example of a breakout when we get into product cost analysis of all the different ways you can view your costs. And this just gives you not only details about what the true costs are going to be, but when you get into production, now you can measure all these things. So you can see where your inefficiencies are in production. If costs are getting high or low in certain areas, you can now target that instead of wondering, okay, I know my cost went up for this batch, but I have no idea at which stage in the labor process. Now we can really drill down onto that. We talked about comparison, so here we have a couple of examples. First, on the comparative property analysis, we have different revisions of the same formula side by side that shows the different physical properties, so we can compare the two and see how they've gone up or down depending on the changes in the formula. And then we also have different cost comparisons side by side of our cost analysis. So I mentioned all the different cost sources that you can choose from. In this case, we're looking at last purchase price. You can also compare different packaging bill of materials side by side. So maybe a pail versus a drum, or a bottle versus a can versus a bottle. And then the breakout of all those different costs that we just looked at with a bottom line and then a calculated sales price as well. Quality control. So you'll be able to define your in-process QC test for all of your formulas, and that's what you're seeing here. So we're testing Brix, E. coli, et cetera. Different measuring types. So numeric tests are going to have lower and upper control limits, as you can see down here, and then a nominal or target value. And if we enter a test result that's outside of the control limits, the test is going to fail, and then you're going to have a final disposition by QA that determines whether or not they can release it, maybe after some further modifications to the batch, or if you have to scrap it or release it at risk, whatever your process may be. And then of course there's also just pass-fail types, and then alphanumeric where you can just enter a color like yellow, something like that. And then whether or not you want to print that test on a certificate of analysis or C of A. And then we also have customer specific C of A. So if you have customers that have different testing requirements, when you generate a C of A, each customer will see only the test they want to see on their C of A without having to manually create one every time. Of course, we have approvals. So here you see we have our approvals turned on, and you can have multiple approvers. It could be a sequence where it goes to approver A, then approver B, or it could be a group of approvers and one out of the three has to approve it, however you want to set that up. And here we have just what the approver would see when the request comes to them. So I have a couple of approvers set up here. Of course, you can email approval requests so they get that on their mobile device no matter where they are. And then you see at the bottom, they can review very quickly and easily the formula, the revision number. They can drill into that, take a look at it, and then approve it from here. All right, so now let's talk about production. So here you can see kind of a workflow for batch job creation. And in our example so far, we've had intermediates going into kind of a final formula that then goes into some kind of a container. So notice that we are scheduling our different steps on different process cells or equipment. So a process cell could be a blender, it could be an entire line, it could be a room that has multiple pieces of equipment in it. However you schedule and operate, that's how you can define it. So it's very flexible. And then within each batch, you'll have the formula or the packaging specification, the process cell you're running it on, your expected losses or expected yields there. Now within production, we have multiple ways that we can streamline production and automate a lot of the functions that you're going to do on that you currently do on paper, presumably, or in maybe a different system. So some of those are going to be auto allocating lots based upon expiration and shelf life. The quality status, is it on hold or is it released? And the customer reservation. So if it's a customer consignment inventory that has to go in this particular production batch, you can then allocate that up front so that no other production batch can consume that. You can auto-generate pick and quality tasks, and we'll see examples of those both on paper and a mobile device. Auto-generate lot numbers and expiration and shelf life dates for your formulas or recipes and your finished goods. Auto backflush consumed inventory quantities at completion. So if there's certain items that you don't need to specify a lot number, so maybe it's film or something like that, you could backflush that. Auto-generate nutritional labels for food, SDS for chemical, product labels, and any other documentation, certificate of analysis, bill of lading. And then auto-update the GP database, which means that all these financial transactions that we're creating automatically hit the general ledger. There's no posting required, anything like that. It's all hitting the GL in real time there. All right, so now let's take a look at a batch ticket. And you can see here we have our batch number, the formula that we're making. And then if we look at the formula tab, we have the details of the formula that get pulled in from that formula we just looked at automatically. And in this example, we do have raw materials and text. And anytime you print a batch ticket on paper, you're going to see the formula in the sequence that it was built. So if you want them to read instructions and then add ingredients and then read instructions and mix for 30 minutes and what have you, you would just build it in that sequence and they'll always see it that way. Of course, the quantity required of each raw material and whatever unit and measure you define will be presented here, and any labor overhead associated with each step, any loss that's expected. You can have loss at the individual raw material level or at the overall batch level, depending on how you want to calculate it. Here we have our inventory allocation screen for a batch, and like I just said, the system can automatically allocate lots to the batch based on first expiry, first out, first in, first out, or you can manually override that as needed. And then of course, any lots that are on hold or expired would not be available to be allocated to a batch at this time. So here we have our raw materials, the quantity required, the quantity available to allocate to it. Notice that things like lot strength are going to come into play. So when you select a lot, let's say that has a potency of 90%, then the system will automatically calculate that you need an extra 10% in order to hit your target yield and tell you that quantity required for that lot. So it is lot specific when you get to this point. And the allocation is an optional step. If you don't allocate raw materials to a batch in advance, you don't have to. You can just let your pickers go pick whatever lots they normally would get based on your physical discipline that you have in the warehouse, and then update the system either after the pick, if it's a piece of paper, or while you're picking on a mobile device. So here we have an example of a barcoded pick list. And you can see here that, of course, we have all of our batch details at the top, all of the raw materials that we need to go pick. The lot numbers are barcoded, so if you want them to scan off the piece of paper after they pick the lot, you can do that. If you're printing barcoded labels, then you can just have them scan it off the label. Same with the bin locations. They can scan the bin, they can scan it from the pick list, or they can just look it up on the mobile device as well. And all this can be written down on the pick list. So once everything is picked, you come to the batch close screen here, and you'll see a summary of all your costs that went into that, your yield. Here I can click through and see all of the raw materials that were used, the quantities that were produced, any packaging items that were used, any byproducts. You can certainly have byproducts with your formulas. So if you have like wastewater for chemical or crust for bread that's being trimmed, something like that, then you would have a certain quantity of that byproduct that's produced that you can now use in another formula or dispose of. Now, throughout all of those processes, we're going to have different quality steps that are available, and you can choose to leverage this however you want. So you can have inspection plans, and inspections are commonly used for things like receiving raw materials and inspecting the quality or the conditions of the truck, inspecting equipment before production or after production, inspecting the pallet to make sure it has all the labels and documentation before finished goods go out the door. Checklists are very similar, but you're just checking off a list of things that indicate you've done it, which could also have a verifier, a different user that's verifying. And you can have a checklist for, again, the conditions of the truck, and it's just check, 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 everything looks good. Your SOPs will be incorporated in your batch and production, and your quality control tests. So quality control tests are going to control the status of the lot. Raw material comes in and needs to be tested. It's on hold until it's released by quality. Until those QC tests are entered, the results are entered, and then it's approved by quality, that will automatically change the status from a hold status that you define, what you call it, to something like released. And now it can go into production. Same thing in production. You have to test it, release it before it can be put away. And then maybe you want a series of tests performed before the finished goods go out the door, or it's just an inspection. So QC tests will always hold the product and with a formal release, whereas inspections and checklists are not going to change the status of the lot, but they're going to allow you to capture a lot of that quality data that you need currently that you're probably doing on paper. And then as a output of that, for example, an inspection, let's say you're inspecting equipment and you're looking for a certain RPM or temperature level on your equipment and it exceeds the control limit, you can have a non-conformance automatically generated and sent to QA to notify them that there's a problem, and they can act on it. They can put the batch on hold, and then that may lead to a CAPA, corrective action, preventative action. And then of course you have customer complaints and adverse events that you can also track in the system as well. So here we have a QC order for a batch, and you can see where the data is entered here. So we're testing gluten strength and solubility in this example. We have our numerical test values, and these are within our upper and lower control limits. So we're able to go ahead and pass this. Of course, you can have multiple samples that you take, and depending on the results, pass or fail. All right, so we talked about how you can execute a batch on paper a little bit. Let's talk now about mobile transactions. So you can see pretty much everything we just talked about transactionally can be done on a mobile device, from receiving raw materials, generating a license plate or product label. We have our inspections throughout all those processes that I mentioned can be done on a mobile device. We have our QC tests can be entered on a mobile device, inspecting the equipment before we issue material, issuing the material into the batch, testing it in process, moving the finished goods to their storage location when they're done, and then picking and shipping the product out the door. So here we have a couple of examples. First, we have a PO material receipt. So we're receiving raw materials on a purchase order. And notice that our lot number is automatically being generated based on what we call our lot masking that you would define. And that can vary per item if you want, or it can be global across, it doesn't matter. And you can enter the vendor lot number, because of course that will change shipment to shipment. You could scan that in or type it in, however you want to do that. The bin location, you could look that up. Expiration date typically is entered based on what the vendor gave you, but you could even auto-generate that if you just want to say for this item it's a standard 12-month expiration because the vendor doesn't give me one. And then on a put away, same thing. We're always going to be defining a bin location and a lot number for anything that's lot tracked. Of course, if it's a non-lot tracked item, it's not going to require a lot number to move that particular item. All right, so now let's talk about scheduling. So you can see that we have the ability, of course, to schedule batches, and then at the top, we have an example of independent batches where we're going to back schedule based on the finished good demand. So customer places an order. Let's say you have a 3-week lead time. Then customer service enters that date. We're going to back schedule from there, and we know we need to start the first formula on this date in order to meet that lead time. We will factor in lead times, or I should say run times, for all your formulas, and those will be process cell specific. So certain, depending on the density of a formula, it could take longer to run it on a low volume mixer versus a high RPM mixer. All that's being considered. QC lead time, how long it takes to test and release something, especially if you're doing micro testing. And then economic order quantities. What batch size do I want to make? If the demand is between 100 and 500 pounds, I want to go ahead and make 500 pounds. So all that's being considered. And we have the ability to consolidate. So we talked about how one formula can go into multiple packaging configurations. So if you're selling the same formula to many different customers and many different private labels, for example, we can consolidate all that demand at the formula level and make one large economic batch of the formula that then gets packaged out in multiple packaging configurations or BOMs. And then we also have the concept of a super batch, which is great for contract manufacturers, make to order. There's other use cases as well, where we're going to link all these batches together from the top level down. So if a customer orders 1,000 drums, then we're just going to produce however much of the formula we need to fill 1,000 drums. All those batches are going to be linked together and scheduled automatically from when we need to ship it out the door back. And then you'll see an example on the production scheduling board that when we go to reschedule one of those batches, all the others have to fall in line because they're tied together, they're linked, and they're dependent upon each other. So here you see an example of a super batch where we have those linked or dependent batch jobs here. And these are all the different sub batches, if you will, that are going to go into the making of this super batch. And each has its own quantity, and this is all calculated for you. So if I were to create this manually, I would just say I need 1,000 eaches of these packs, and all this work is done for me. Notice you can do forward scheduling or backward scheduling. So if it's more of a scenario of, okay, tell me when I can have this finished, then you can do forward scheduling. Or if it's more of a lead time, then you can do backward scheduling. And then taking that to the next step in the scheduling phase, we have a couple of planning engines that you can use. One's called Master Production Scheduling, or MPS. And MPS is going to look at all your top level finished good demand, drive that all the way down, and tell you everything that you need to make and give you recommendations on what you need to make for as far out as you want to plan. That will either create independent batches or super batches, depending on your mode, and it could be a combination of both. And then MRP, which is Material Requirements Planning, is going to look at all the demand for production and recommend which purchase orders you need to place to get your raw materials in on time. And you can see workflow here going from MPS, so that's looking at customers, sales orders coming in from customer service, e-commerce, EDI, and that will, from the recommendations, allow you to generate your batches. And then you're going to go to the scheduling board, see all your batches, whether it's existing batches or recommendations visually, and then finalize the schedule, publish it, release your batches, and then get it into production. So here's our production dashboard, and you can see we have our process cells down the left and then our dates across the top, and you can filter by process cell and by date, and then you can hide that panel once you're done. And then you can also see the batch details at the bottom, or hide that if you want to have more space. So within this, I see different batches, and I see different tasks for cleaning, changeovers, things like that. And then I also see MPS recommendations that have not been turned into batches. So I can see what the system is recommending I do versus what I already have. And then from here, you can always hover over a batch, click on a batch, see the batch details. You can click and drag to reschedule a batch from one cell to the next, or earlier or later in the day, or a different day. And then you can also do things like run the critical material report to see if you're short on any raw materials for this current schedule. Now, of course, we have comprehensive lot management throughout the system. I've referenced this quite a few times. Everything we do when it comes to lot traceability, you're going to define from the time you receive a raw material all the way to when you ship finished good out the door. And you can see some representations of all those transactions here. And when we go to ship, again, we have a mobile device here. So we're going to go to material picking. We're going to look at our sales orders that are available. We're always going to define the bin and the lot number that we're pulling. And if the lot is only in one bin, you can just scan the lot and the bin will auto-populate, so that'll save you a step. And every time you ship lot tracked items, the system will force you to define those lots so that we have complete lot traceability. And then after you've picked everything on the mobile device, then from the sales order here, this is where you see our integration to StarShip to calculate the freight. And Chris is going to continue with that in just a minute, so you'll see how StarShip picks that up. And then finally, that leads me into lot traceability and recall. So once you ship the product out the door, what happens if there's a problem? How do we find out where that problem came from? Well, with our lot traceability, you can trace it from the raw material all the way through WIP to where it was shipped to your customer. Or if the customer is complaining about a finished good lot, you can start with the shipment, work your way back through production, all the way to the vendor lot. So here on our lot traceability map, this is an example of where we're starting with a shipment, and you can see that this particular lot shipped to multiple customers, and I can drill down and see all the different shipments that it went out on. I could view the QC details to see what the test results were for that lot. I can see how many I have in inventory currently, which is 0, and the details of where it was at the time. And then I can work my way back through production. So you can see this is a batch. I can see all the issues of the raw materials to that batch, and when I drill down on this one, it takes me to the receipt of that raw material, and now I can drill into that receipt, see the vendor, see the lot number, the date, the purchase order number, and all of that. And then if I determine there's an issue and I need to do a lot recall, and this is great for mock recalls because I know everyone has to do that, no matter how many customers you ship this to, you can just right-click on this and generate a lot recall letter, and you'll get 1 page per customer for that particular lot that you shipped with your boilerplate instructions on what to do with that lot in that scenario. All right, to summarize, you can see, as you've seen throughout, BatchMaster Manufacturing for GP adds all of this process manufacturing capabilities to GP, including, of course, costing throughout, formulation, packaging, bill of materials, going into planning, production, execution, and compliance. So the benefits of BatchMaster Manufacturing are accelerating product development, balance inventory levels, quickly scale up production, ensure quality standards are being met, ensure regulatory mandates are being met, reduce overall manufacturing costs, continuously improve manufacturing processes, and quickly make more informed business decisions. Thank you very much. And with that, I will hand it over to Chris.
Thanks, Antoine. I'll go ahead and share my desktop. All right, so we're going to go through a brief PowerPoint, and then I'll take you through a product demo. StarShip and V Technologies have been developing shipping integrations for 32 years now. Been working with BatchMaster since 2005, I believe, was our first implementation. So many years in the business working with Dynamics GP. StarShip basically is your hub for all shipping activity, tying together various systems. So we're, of course, working with Dynamics GP to pull all the ERP data, and through SQL to pull all the BatchMaster data into StarShip as well that would need to go on any documents or on shipping labels. StarShip also has hooks into various EDI platforms to automate the ASN process to let your trading partners know that the shipment's on the way. Completing that fulfillment process also has the ability to print the 128 compliance labels, interaction with all the various carriers, both parcel and freight, to get your rates, tender the load, manifest your packages, and get all of the correct documents to get it out the door. And we're also hooked into various e-commerce platforms as well. Here you see a slide with a number of different carriers. This list is always expanding. So if there's a particular carrier that you're working with or a 3PL, you can certainly take down the information. We're always tracking requests and adding additional features to the software. Just because you don't see this here, there's also some hosted options that are available as well that we can explore. You also have a number of e-commerce marketplaces and shopping carts that are available. You'll see a list here of all the different options that are available. So StarShip can tie in directly with your cart, or we can bring in all of the e-commerce orders out of GP and hit the APIs for the various carts on the way out. So we're updating the status online as well as pushing all that information back into GP. So with that, we'll get into a quick demo here. Here you see the StarShip user interface. I have a new browser-based user interface that was introduced last year for Dynamics GP. So we have everything in the browser here. You have the ability to sort on multiple sales transactions here. With GP, we link into orders, quotes, fulfillment orders, invoices, returns. So you also have the ability to multi-select here if you want to do batch processing. If you have barcodes on your pick tickets, you can scan in the order right off of your paperwork and bring that directly in, or you can select this transaction here and start to ship that. we'll bring in all the order data from GP. Address validation is a standard feature with StarShip across the board with all of your carriers. So we'll flag the address, make any corrections. We can also push that corrected address information back into the GP sales transaction. You'll notice you have all these widgets here. Looking from left to right, you have the information from your GP order. You can also add fields here to the view based on what it is that you want to see. You can easily toggle back and forth between the various widgets. This will be highlighted in red if there's some information that's missing here. We're going to look at our packaging first. If you have weights in inventory, those can come over from GP, or you can put the product on a scale. We also integrate with Cubiscan for dimensional weight. That can scan the exterior dimensions of your packages as you're going through and processing them. You can expand the view here in our shipping assistant. And we can add packages, so we can put products into individual containers. So I can click on the new package icon here, and then we can pick from a drop-down menu what type of container we want to put this into. Once we have everything packed up, I'm going to switch back over to the shipment editor. And then from here, we can take a look at all the various options that are available to the user for shipping. By default, we're going to pull in the ship method from GP. I need to wait there. That would help. We can change the carrier here as well. We do value translations from the ship method on the header or the item level to select the carrier and service. If the user has permission, they can toggle back and forth here between different services, different carriers. We can also automate that process through some business logic by applying ship via rules. You also have the ability to do rate shopping in StarShip that can give you options of looking at multiple carriers. So StarShip can also be automated to kind of pick that carrier for you automatically. You can sort on the time in transit, look at the cost versus the transit time, or StarShip is smart enough that it can make that decision for you if you've set up the automation. We'll go ahead and stick with the service that came over from GP. I'll process the shipment here. There's also keyboard shortcuts for all of your common program functions. F3 on your keyboard will process the shipment, print out your labels, your documents. Once we've processed that, all the jobs will go to the printer, and the cursor will come back over here waiting for you to scan or select the next transaction. So let's take a look at the results of that. And look back in GP here. So out of the box, we're going to insert a number of different fields into GP. This can also be customized. Starting with the order header notes, you have some detail here about the shipment, when it went out, when it's going to get there, how it was shipped, number of pieces, and then a breakdown here of the package contents with the tracking information. Any of the fields that are in StarShip are available to write here to the note. You have total control over this. We also put a header and a footer around our notes, so we're not going to wipe out anything that may be in GP already. Moving to the user-defined fields, you have the tracking table here. We'll insert a record for each container that was shipped. So you'll have your package tracking here. If it's a freight shipment, you'll have your pro number and your bill of lading number here. There's user-defined fields in GP that we can also update. So I have mine set up to take my cost, whatever my exposure is on the freight, I can write that here to a user-defined field. And I also just put in a confirmation that it was shipped. But we're also capturing the cost and the marked up amount. You can use freight rules in StarShip to add some logic to how much freight you want to pass on to the order or the invoice, so you can mark that up conditionally. That can also be used to have conditions where you don't charge freight, or maybe discounts where you have special incentive programs. That's fully customizable and automated. Batch ID, we can take the batch and move it to a new batch. So I have a shipped batch that I've created. We tag the batch on the right back. That can push it along the workflow, move it along to the next step. You also have fulfillment orders. We can update the document status. Some of the other things that we can do are updating the address. As I mentioned with the address validation, we can insert any of the ship to information here for the corrected address in there. You also have the reverse value translations on the ship method. So if you, let's say, are rate shopping and you sent this by FedEx, by the post office, we can also insert the actual service that was used here and update that on the sales transaction. Actual ship date, StarShip also has a SQL extension, and that can be leveraged to read and write data to alternate tables such as GP Extender, SalesPad. That's also what can be used with BatchMaster with SQL integration as well to take all that data from multiple sources, merge it into one shipment, so you have multiple sources that you're pulling from. We can also update other sources as well, such as your EDI application or your shopping cart, all from the same shipping activity. So once that's processed, everything is updated here in GP in real time out in the warehouse. As you continue to make edits throughout the day, we'll continue to update these sales transactions. In StarShip, you also have access to a dashboard that gives you visibility to all of the activity over a date range. You have a number of widgets and reports here that can be used to extract information that can be printed out as reports or exported to a file. One of the cool things here we have with the dashboard is also a heat map here where you can see all of the activity where you're shipping to most commonly. StarShip also has SQL views that are exposed, so if you need to extract data directly from our tables through a reporting application, Crystal or SQL reporting services, SmartList with GP, all that data is exposed and accessible to be reported off of as well. We also have a batch export where we can feed you raw data. There's XML, so plenty of different options to get information out of StarShip, but there's also a number of canned reports here that your front office can use to take a look back over the historical date range and take a look at all the shipping activity, costs, things like that. There's a couple other things. StarShip has a built-in custom email notification option. So instead of using the carrier's emails, you have the ability here to use a custom email template. You can add your own color, formatting, changes, logos, so it can emulate the look and feel of your website. You can have links here back into your sites. We can pull attachments from an external directory, or you also have the ability here to grab any of the shipping documents. So any of the information that's generated in StarShip can be printed to PDF. Those PDFs can be set up with email templates to automatically email the customer a copy of, say, a bill of lading, export documentation, a packing list, and all of that can be completely automated, hands-free. You can set up rules on when these things can be sent and whoever the audience is with conditions. Take a look at some of the various documents in StarShip. Of course, I mentioned, shipping labels you have. We can also produce bills of lading. There are a number of bill of lading templates that are standard to StarShip. You have a straight bill of lading, a VIX bill of lading. All of these can be customized as well. You can also get documents directly from the carriers. So any of the carrier modules that you saw earlier in the slide, you can have documents pulled directly from the carrier's APIs and printed out using their templates, their formats. There's also a bill of lading here for a master bill of lading if you have truckloads or multi-stop type shipments. Packing lists can also be produced. You have a shipment level packing list, or we can do that at the box level. You have a number of different formats where you can print both the shipping label and the packing list side by side. So you peel the label off, put that on the box, and the packing list goes inside. If you're doing exports, shipping to other international locations, of course, a lot of the carriers offer electronic documents now. You have that option if you don't want to print out on the paper, save a tree, but you also have the traditional forms that are available as well. You have the commercial invoice available, the NAFTA paperwork, US certification, or certificate of origin rather, shipper's letter of instruction if you're using a broker or freight forwarder, basically a manifest of everything that you're shipping. So any of these documents here that I'm showing you are available to be customized on the user interface. And you can take a look at one of those documents here. This is essentially what was underneath that commercial invoice document. This is a template designer that's built into StarShip you'll have access to. We can also be contracted. Any of our techs can take a spec and design the form for you, but you have access to any of these objects here that you can drag and drop onto the page. Logos, you can draw on the page, barcodes, bands of text where you see columns of data that line up, individual fields or blocks of text. So you can take any of our default information, wipe that out, or take any of the fields here and override that with whatever information you want. You have different categories of data here, so you're looking at all of the line item fields. Basically, if you see it on the screen, you can grab that information and lay that out on the form wherever you want to see that. I know we're a bit pressed for time today, so if there's anyone that's interested in an individual demo, you can feel free to contact us. There'll be a follow-up email going out to everybody that signed up for the demo with a webinar video, but feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to take a closer look at StarShip.
Thank you so much, Chris. Great presentation. You should see contact information here. And everyone enjoy the rest of the week. Take care. Bye-bye.